"Ma'am, please step back." The officer's voice was flat but firm, as he gestured between my wife and the HOA president, standing smug on our front step. Colleen Ashbury didn't move. She adjusted her lanyard, letting the little gold HOA badge rest neatly over her chest like it was some kind of shield. "She's not an approved occupant," she said, her voice syrupy and calm. "According to Section 8.1, we require single-family dwellings to submit new occupancy paperwork for all adult residents not named on the original filing, and she didn't file. "She's my wife," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Colleen's gaze flicked to Natalie's belly, rounded, unmistakably pregnant, and then back to me. "That's not the question. She's not on the HOA form. That makes her unauthorized. And unauthorized occupants can't reside here more than 72 hours. We've already allowed 5 days." Natalie shifted beside me. One hand protectively cradled her stomach. The other gripped the edge of the porch rail, as if trying not to shake. I stepped forward. "You sure you want to cite Section 8.1? I asked. Colleen narrowed her eyes. "Because I helped write the 2020 state amendment that clarified residency qualifications for single-family zones. Your citation is invalid. The clause was superseded." Colleen blinked, just once, a micro-glitch in her performance. I wasn't done. "She's not a guest. She's a federal agent on maternity leave. She's also a legal co-owner on the deed, which I can pull up right now. So, unless you want this to become a federal issue, I'd step off my porch." The cop shifted his stance and looked toward Colleen, his face unreadable. Colleen didn't move, but the smugness softened. "I'm just following process," she said, eyes now on the officer. "The HOA's authority is clearly—" "It isn't," I cut in, calm but sharper now. "Not when you misuse it. My name's Eli Vance, Homeowners Association Compliance Consultant, former Zoning Board Advisor. The guy HOAs quietly hire to review their documents when they think they're about to be sued. That's who I am on paper. But this was personal. This home wasn't just an address. It was the last gift my father helped me secure before he passed. He'd even co-signed the mortgage to get us the best rate. I promised him we'd build something lasting here. Natalie and I had painted this house ourselves, laid the garden beds, planted a Japanese maple in the front yard, my dad's favorite. And now she wanted to scare my pregnant wife out of it? Not a chance. Colleen assumed we were just another couple she could pressure with fines and citations. She thought she could invoke bylaws like scripture, and we'd tremble in compliance. But I don't tremble. Not when someone threatens my wife. Not on the ground my father walked. I looked over at Natalie, who gave me the smallest nod. Not scared, just tired of being treated like she didn't belong. I turned back to Colleen. "You're done here," I said. She opened her mouth to argue again, but the officer raised a hand. "If she's on the deed and there's no emergency, I don't see a reason to get involved here," he said, voice gruff. "You can file a civil complaint if you want." That stung her. She masked it, but I saw it. The twitch at her jaw, the calculation behind her eyes. She didn't like being publicly ignored. Not in front of me, not in front of the badge. She walked off our porch like she still held the high ground, but she didn't realize she'd just handed me her playbook. "Where are you watching from?" "I ask you because this isn't just our fight. This happens in neighborhoods across the country. Power-drunk board members using rules to bully, intimidate, and erase people they don't like. But here's the thing about people like Colleen. They love to enforce rules, but they never expect anyone to enforce the rest of them. What she doesn't know? I already pulled her bylaws. I already know the procedural gaps. She thinks this ends with a warning, but I'm going to bury her in compliance so deep, she'll need a vote just to breathe." The next morning, I walked to the community bulletin board, clipboard in hand. I wasn't pretending. I really did need to jot down some dates for Natalie's maternity parking request. But I had another reason too. I wanted to see who else Colleen had gone after. Our HOA required public posting of all citations within 48 hours of issuance. It was a little window most people ignored. Not me, yes. 6 notices lined the board. 6 families, cited for different violations in the past 8 weeks. An unapproved mailbox shape, a decorative bird bath, 2 reflective, 1 dog allegedly barking during non-approved hours, and 3 separate unauthorized occupant notices. Each name had one thing in common. They were families new to the neighborhood. Every single one. Some had accents, some weren't white. All had moved in after 2020. Colleen wasn't enforcing policy. She was curating her vision of who belonged. The worst part, it was working. The Thompsons, a younger couple who moved in just last fall, had already put their house on the market. Rumor said they were expecting and tired of compliance drama. I couldn't blame them. "Looking for your next violation," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Graham, one of the board members, friendly when it suited him. Today, not so much. "Looking for patterns," I replied. He snorted. "You people always think there's a conspiracy." "What people?" He blinked. "Newcomers?" I didn't respond, didn't need to. His mouth had said enough. Back at home, I flipped open my laptop and began organizing what I'd seen. Dates, violation types, family names, proximity to Colleen's property line, repeated language in citations. I wasn't just angry, I was preparing. I knew where this was headed. Natalie sat beside me with a mug of peppermint tea, one hand over her belly, the other scrolling through housing market listings on her phone. "Thinking of leaving?" I asked. "Just curious how many people Colleen's run out already," she said, not looking up. "Feels like she wants us gone." "She does," I said flatly. "But that means she's sloppy somewhere. People like Colleen get cocky, and cocky people leave tracks." I pulled up the HOA's online portal. Most homeowners didn't realize how much internal data was public if you knew where to look. Past meeting minutes, citations, enforcement notices, annual budget statements. They were all technically transparent, if buried beneath 5 tabs in a PDF archive that hadn't been updated since 2019. I found 2 mismatches immediately, one notice issued without any record of a hearing, and another citing a bylaw that had been struck down in 2021. Both bore Colleen's signature. That's when I knew. This wasn't isolated. This was a pattern. And I wasn't going to fight it with anger. I was going to drown her in her own rules. Later that afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. Not aimless, intentional. I passed the Daniels' home. Their violation notice still hung from their front gate like a scarlet letter. Mrs. Daniels came out to water her petunias. She nodded at me politely. "Rough week?" I asked gently. She sighed. "I've lived here 21 years. Now she's saying my son can't stay the weekend when he visits from college unless I give her notice in writing. That's not enforceable." She blinked. "It's not? Not even close." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Then why's she doing it?" I gave her a small smile. "Because no one stopped her." I didn't stay long, but as I walked off, I saw her lower the notice from the gate, one tiny crack in Colleen's wall. Back home, I printed out Section 6.7 of the HOA bylaws. It clearly stated that any enforcement action required written board consensus before citation, something Colleen had never filed for hours. I highlighted it. Then I opened a fresh folder. HOA Compliance Triggers, I wrote at the top. Natalie glanced over. "You starting something?" I nodded. "Number?" "I'm finishing it." Because this time, it wasn't about a bird bath or mailbox. It was about our child, about whether he or she would grow up thinking home was something someone else could take from you, with a clipboard and a smirk. Not if I had anything to say about it. I'd been to HOA board meetings before, quiet, dry affairs held in echoey spaces filled with lukewarm coffee and indifference. But this one was charged. Natalie stayed home. She'd offered to come, but I needed her rested, not stressed. Her blood pressure had already spiked once this trimester. I promised I'd keep it civil. That was a lie, but it made her smile. The meeting was held in the back room of the local library. 10 chairs lined the walls, all filled. 2 neighbors stood in the doorway, arms crossed, listening. At the front, 3 folding tables formed a makeshift dais. Nameplates, pens, printed agendas, every piece of formality trying to cover up what this really was. Control theater. Colleen sat at the center like it was a throne. To her right was a thin man with neatly parted hair and a forced smile. Graham, again. He nodded to me, tight-lipped. To her left sat someone I hadn't spoken to yet. Raymond Delaney, HOA treasurer. Older, maybe late 60s, gray suit jacket one size too big. His posture was excellent, but his hands gave him away. One tapped a slow, unconscious rhythm on his clipboard, while the other kept adjusting his pen, then readjusting. Colleen opened with the usual call to order. Then came community concerns. I raised my hand. She hesitated, but nodded. Mr. Vance, I'd like clarification on the citation issued against my household last week, I said. Specifically, how it was authorized. Colleen offered her best public smile. It followed protocol. You had an unregistered occupant. My wife, I cut in, who's listed on the property deed. And I reviewed Section 6.7. It states no enforcement action can be issued without full board consensus. Silence rippled. Raymond's pen froze in his hand. Colleen leaned back. The board delegated enforcement authority to the chair under emergency discretion last year. Really? I said. Because I searched the public meeting minutes. No record of that delegation exists. Now Raymond's hand twitched. His eyes darted down to his own copy of the minutes. Colleen's smile tightened, the corners straining. Some votes are informal. I kept my voice even. Then they're not enforceable. I didn't need her to admit wrongdoing tonight. I just needed the board and the room to hear it. And they did. Every shuffle, every cough, every glance exchanged told me that someone in here had just learned something they weren't supposed to know. I turned to Raymond deliberately. Did you vote to approve our citation, Mr. Delaney? He looked like he'd just been handed a live wire. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His knuckles whitened around the pen. His eyes flicked to Colleen, then back to me. I wasn't present at that review, he muttered. His body said more than his words, shoulders drawn in, eyes averted. Like a man remembering how far he'd let something slide without stopping it, I nodded once. That was enough for now. Graham tried to pivot, bringing up fence height regulations, but no one cared. The tension was too thick. Even the neighbors at the door leaned in a little closer. By the end of the meeting, Colleen was visibly agitated. Her voice had lost its cadence. The room wasn't responding the way she was used to. And Raymond, he looked shaken, not angry, guilty. Like a man who'd sat silently through too many decisions he didn't believe in. As I left the library, I slowed when I saw him trailing behind me in the parking lot. For a second, I thought he might say something. His gaze met mine. He opened his mouth, then lowered his eyes and kept walking. Not yet, I thought, but he's close. Back home, Natalie sat on the couch, feet up, a mug of cocoa resting on her belly. How bad? Better than I expected, I said, easing beside her. The cracks are showing. One of them might be ready to talk. She glanced at me. The quiet one? Raymond. He's not built for this kind of power. He's just trying to keep the lights on. And Colleen? Colleen's built for war, but she just lost her silence shield. Natalie reached out and squeezed my hand. Be careful. I nodded, because now the board knew I wasn't just a concerned homeowner, and one of them knew I'd seen his doubt. I wasn't just aiming to push back. I was going to make them unravel themselves. Ever seen someone stay silent while injustice played out right in front of them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in Raymond's seat? The letter came by courier, not USPS, not EMAIL. A real courier, black slacks, clipboard, signature required. I opened it right there in the lobby of my office building, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like they already knew. The envelope had the HOA seal in the corner, thick paper, formal font. Second notice, non-compliance enforcement intent to fine. My name, Natalie's name, our address, the violation, ongoing unapproved occupancy. Below that, the number that made me stop cold, $250 per day, retroactive to the date of Colleen's first visit. It had been 9 days. That meant $2,250 and rising. I sat down on the nearest bench and reread it. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were escalating. At the bottom was Colleen's signature, bold and centered like it was a royal decree. She'd even included a paragraph about continued disregard of community harmony, and a veiled suggestion that legal escalation might be warranted if we didn't correct the issue with urgency. That's when it stopped being about her. This was the board now, and if the board thought they could out-paperwork me, they'd underestimated what I do for a living. I called Natalie, told her not to worry, told her I had it handled. I didn't mention the amount, just the tone of the letter. She deserved peace right now. That meant I'd take the hit and make them regret swinging. Back upstairs, I unlocked my office door and sat at my desk. The blinds were half open, casting sharp stripes of morning light across the wood grain. My screensaver blinked away as I pulled up my archive folder. HOA form templates. 2019 to 2023. I hadn't looked at those files since my last contract, but remembered every line, every clause, every quiet correction I'd made on other boards who got sloppy with enforcement. Sloppy, like issuing monetary penalties without proof of mailed notice, full board vote, or a 15-day grace period. I opened Colleen's letter again. No mention of a hearing, no record of a board resolution, just a fine and a threat. I smiled. They'd skipped steps. They always do, eventually. Colleen's ego had outpaced her process. I copied the letter and marked it up. Red ink on scanned PDF. Circled language violations, highlighted procedural skips, annotated the page like it was a case study for a training seminar, which, in any other context, it could have been. Then I opened a blank document and began writing the response. Not an email, a formal reply, compliant with HOA rebuttal formatting under our governing documents. RE, notice of unenforceable fine. I laid it out clean. No emotion, just regulation. Their own handbook used like a scalpel. The phone rang once. I let it go. Someone knocked on the glass. I waved them away. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional now. Colleen had stepped into my arena. By the time I finished, the sun had shifted halfway across my desk. I printed 2 copies, one for delivery, one for record. I even notarized it downstairs in the lobby just to send a message. When I got back to the car, I sat for a minute and looked at the folded letter beside me. 9 days of silence, then a threat wrapped in ceremony. That's how they do it. Make it official, make it expensive, make you doubt what you know is right. But I don't doubt. Not anymore. At home, Natalie was resting, a warm plate of takeout on the counter and her favorite quilt across her lap. She looked up when I walked in. Bad? I shook my head. Expected. She studied me for a second, then nodded. You sent something back? Oh yeah, I said, hanging up my jacket. They're about to learn what actual compliance looks like. I sat beside her and took her hand. Her fingers curled around mine instinctively. Don't let them get to you, she whispered. They won't, I said. They're too busy skipping steps, and I'm done letting that slide. Because this wasn't just a bad policy anymore. It was a bill, one they were going to pay for, line by line. I needed distance. Not from the problem, but from the pressure. So I took my laptop and went somewhere Colleen wouldn't follow, the rooftop cafe near my office. Glass walls, soft jazz, the kind of place where people talked in low voices and minded their own business. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the far window, sunlight cutting across my screen. I didn't need inspiration. I needed evidence. I pulled up the HOA's member portal again, but this time I bypassed the public view. I had admin credentials from a past contract still stored on a private server. Most HOAs use third-party compliance software, low-cost systems with poor password hygiene. The one our HOA used? I'd done a UI overhaul for their vendor last year. They never revoked my back-end permissions. So, when I entered the sandbox and cross-referenced Colleen's enforcement history, I saw it all. Every letter, every citation, every action logged under her credentials. And what I found made me stop cold. Colleen had issued over 30 violations in the past 6 months, and not one of them showed the required multi-board sign-off. Not one had timestamps for hearing notices. Only 4 had been mailed via verified delivery, a requirement under Section 6.4. 2 were issued during weeks when the HOA wasn't even in session. She wasn't just skipping protocol, she was rewriting it on the fly. And it got worse. I opened the Master Enforcement Index and noticed something I hadn't expected. A discrepancy in version control. The live bylaws on the portal didn't match the official file I'd downloaded last year during my own due diligence when we moved in. 3 clauses had been rearranged. Section 7.2, dealing with non-owner occupancy, had been swapped with an older version, one that had been voted out in 2021. The reinstated clause gave Colleen broader discretion. But it hadn't been approved. There had been no vote, no record, nothing in the minutes. I checked the audit log. The version update came from an IP listed to Colleen's personal address. That's when the cold turned sharp. She hadn't just broken the rules, she'd edited them, Without a vote, without disclosure, she'd falsified the playbook. I sat back in my chair, heart steady, fingers light on the keys. I knew what I was seeing, knew what it meant. This wasn't about our house anymore. This was structural corruption. My phone buzzed, Natalie texting me a photo of the maple tree out front, its red leaves catching the light. She captioned it, "Still the prettiest corner in the neighborhood." That tree was for my father, his favorite, the last thing we planted together before his stroke. And Colleen had tried to uproot everything it stood for with one forged clause. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. It'll still be standing when she's gone. I wasn't being dramatic. I was just done pretending I didn't know how to fight this. I compiled everything: clause mismatches, signature records, version edits, non-compliant citations, into a private report, my report, with footnotes, date stamps, and mirrored backups in case they tried to cover their tracks. They'd tried to find me. Now I had grounds to censure them. I closed my laptop just as the server returned with my check. He looked at the unread coffee, still full. "Refill?" "No, thanks," I said. I just found what I needed. Downstairs, I walked slower than usual, not out of fatigue, but control, because I had it now. Real leverage, the kind you don't need to shout about. When I got home, Natalie was on the porch swing, eyes half closed in the breeze. I joined her without a word, just let the quiet settle around us. After a few minutes, she opened one eye. "That calm means you found something." I nodded once. She rewrote the bylaws. Her brow furrowed. Swapped in an old clause without a vote. Issued citations using a dead policy. I have the logs. Natalie sat up straighter. "So what now?" I turned to face her fully. Now, we stopped playing defense. Because I wasn't just going to expose Colleen's mistakes. I was going to make her follow every single rule she thought she was above, until the whole board buckled under the weight of her shortcuts. Natalie's voice cracked when she called. "I don't want to panic you," she said, "but I'm at urgent care. They said it's probably nothing, just tightness and shortness of breath." I was already in the car before she finished the sentence. Traffic blurred. I don't remember the drive, just the sharp fluorescent lights of the triage lobby and the pale pink of her maternity sweater when I saw her through the curtain. She smiled when I walked in. Brave. Software. But I saw the monitor clipped to her finger, the blood pressure cuff around her arm, and the nurse who didn't smile back. "They said it's stress-related," she whispered. "Everything's okay, but they want me to take it easier." She reached for my hand like it was an anchor. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about proving Colleen wrong anymore. It was about protecting Natalie and the child we hadn't even met yet. And it was about the promise I'd made to my dad the day we planted that maple tree, that our home would always be a place of peace, not fines, not threats, not fear. I drove Natalie home, made her chamomile tea, and tucked her into bed. She told me she felt fine, said it was just a scare, but she didn't need to say it again. I wasn't going to let that happen twice. I went back to my office that night. Dim lights, no distractions, just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the glow of my screen. First, I printed everything. Every document I'd compiled from Colleen's digital edits. Every time-stamped citation. The original and altered bylaw versions. Meeting minutes with unexplained gaps. And I stapled them, neatly, methodically, into a binder. Then I pulled out the HOA's own enforcement matrix. I'd downloaded it the day we moved in. Most residents never look at it. I knew it by heart. On page 3, there was a clause about member rights during grievance actions. Section 3.12. Any member may initiate a formal demand for enforcement consistency if 3 or more non-compliant actions are verifiably discovered. I had over a dozen. I drafted a formal demand for consistency letter, citing each violation by code. No emotion, just facts. Then I attached a second letter, a request for Colleen's removal pending an independent audit. They had built a wall of bureaucracy. I was going to tear it down, one clause at a time. When the clock hit 2 a.m., I slid the binder into my satchel and shut the light. In the morning, I walked to the HOA drop box outside the community center and slid the envelope through the metal slot. That click echoed more than I expected. I turned around to find Mrs. Daniels standing behind me. She was holding a paper of her own. "Copy of my fine from last week," she said. "I saw your post on the neighborhood forum." You thinking of challenging it? I asked. She looked at the Dropbox, then back at me. I was afraid to, but you make it seem possible. I gave her a small nod. It is, especially if we do it together. She dropped her paper in. The box clanked shut. Then she smiled for the first time in weeks. I walked home slowly, past the Thompsons' place, where the for sale sign still leaned half-cocked in the yard, past the brown house where Graham lived, blinds drawn tight, past the maple tree in my yard, swaying gently under a gray morning sky. Inside, Natalie was still asleep, curled up beneath the quilt her mom made. I sat beside her and rested a hand on her back, feeling the rise and fall of every breath. She was safe, for now, but that wouldn't last unless I made it last. So, no more waiting. No more reacting. Colleen wanted a fight, but she'd chosen the wrong man, the wrong family, and the wrong set of rules to break. Because I knew those rules better than she did, and I was about to make her follow every one of them, whether she liked it or not. Has someone ever crossed a line that put your family at risk? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if it were your wife and child? I got the text just after sunset. Raymond Delaney, meet me at the community garden, 8:30. I can't talk at my house. I stared at the screen for a beat, unsure if I should reply. But I didn't need to. The fact that he reached out at all meant something had shifted. Fear cracks eventually, especially when you see who you've been protecting. The air was heavy when I stepped into the garden, mulch damp from the afternoon rain, benches slick, the scent of tomato vines lingering in the air. The old gazebo at the center looked out over a row of raised beds and a lemon tree someone had tried to keep alive through winter. Raymond stood inside, hands clasped in front of him, like he was holding back a confession. I didn't tell her I was meeting you, he said quickly. I figured. He looked around before speaking again. You're not wrong about her, about what she's doing. His voice was low, flat, almost defeated. She's rewriting policies, skipping hearings, pushing fines without votes. I've known for months, but I didn't want to be the one to blow it open. I didn't move. I wanted him to keep talking. Raymond's fingers worked the edge of his sleeve. I joined the board to balance books. That's it. Colleen said she'd handle community enforcement. I figured that meant lawn signs and dog poop, not eviction threats. She went after my pregnant wife, I said softly. He winced. I know. He reached into a worn manila folder beside him and pulled out a few printed pages. These are from the May 2021 meeting, the one where we voted to replace the old 7.2 clause. It passed 5-1. I was there. Graham was there. Colleen was the only holdout. He handed the papers to me, meeting notes, signatures, and the agenda showing the clause update. I compared the digital version online to this, he said. She changed it back 3 months later, quietly. No vote, no announcement. He looked up at me then, and for the first time, his voice broke. She made me complicit. I took the documents carefully, tucking them into my satchel like they were live evidence. You didn't change the files, I said, but now you're helping fix them. Raymond swallowed. I know I'm late. Number, you're on time. We stood there in the silence for a moment, the garden dimming, porch lights flicking on in the distance. Somewhere, a sprinkler clicked to life. It sounded like it was trying too hard. She's going to retaliate, he said after a while. If she finds out I gave you this, she won't, I cut in. Not until we're ready. Raymond nodded, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. I offered a parting nod, then turned and started walking toward the sidewalk. But before I reached the gate, his voice stopped me. She thinks she's untouchable, you know, he said, that no one will ever hold her accountable. I turned back. Then let's prove her wrong. Back home, I spread the pages on the dining table under the pendant light. The ink was faded in places, but the signatures were clean. This was the smoking gun, proof that Colleen had reversed a formal vote without authority. Natalie padded into the room quietly, one hand on her lower back. Raymond? I nodded. He gave me the minutes, the real ones, the ones Colleen buried. Her face softened with something close to pride. He finally picked a side. I looked at her across the table, at the quilted warmth in her eyes, at the child inside her that deserved a home without threats, and I made my decision. No more gentle filings, no more warnings. Tomorrow, I was going to file for formal board action, using their own process, their own language, and their own violations. I was done asking for fairness. I was going to enforce it. Raymond may have brought the spark. I was going to start the fire. I booked the smallest conference room on the 4th floor of my office building, far from the client side, quiet enough for war planning. No one asked why I was in early on a Saturday. The walls were bare, the windows fogged from the morning rain. I spread everything out on the table. HOA bylaws, meeting minutes, Colleen's forged updates, Raymond's handwritten notes, and a highlighter that didn't survive the first hour. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was structure, timing, leverage. I made 3 columns on the whiteboard: bylaw, violation, proof. 1 row at a time, I matched Colleen's shortcuts with the rules she broke to do it. The more I mapped, the clearer the pattern became. She hadn't just ignored process. She'd weaponized it, selectively enforcing sections, deleting others, skipping required community votes under the guise of emergency authority. I found 9 instances where she cited policy that no longer existed, and 6 where she cited nothing at all. I created a master index of procedural violations. The document hit 32 pages before lunch. Then I started building the counterplan, not to accuse yet, but to enforce. Malicious compliance only works when you follow the rules better than the people who wrote them. I pulled the grievance petition template from the HOA portal. It required signatures from 10% of homeowners to force a board review. I drafted a clean introduction, no threats, no anger, just language lifted straight from their own handbook. This wasn't retaliation, this was policy. Next, I wrote a formal letter to Colleen, requesting itemized records of all citations issued under Section 7.2 in the last 12 months. According to the bylaws, she had exactly 10 business days to respond, or face a mandatory suspension hearing for failure to provide documentation. Then I drafted an enforcement neutrality motion for the upcoming board meeting. It called for a procedural audit of all recent citations, a freeze on the disputed 7.2 clause until a formal vote could be confirmed, and a vote to temporarily suspend discretionary powers granted to the board president until the review concluded. All of it was in their own rulebook. Most board members had probably never read past page 15. I'd read through every appendix. I paused to breathe, then picked up my phone and made the call I'd been avoiding. "Hi, yes," I said when the voice answered. "I'd like to schedule a 30-minute consult. HOA procedural compliance. I'm the homeowner. Yes. No, not looking to sue. Not yet." I hung up and filed that resource under external pressure, just in case I needed a lawyer's name attached to anything in Phase 2. By mid-afternoon, I had 5 folders printed and labeled on the table: petitions, board actions, bylaw conflicts, signature forms, and enforcement logs. They looked unassuming, like files in any office. But I knew what they were. They were the paperwork version of a loaded spring. Colleen had built her authority on speed and silence. I was going to bury her in the rules she forgot to follow. I took a lap around the floor to stretch, then returned to finalize my digital prep. I scheduled an email to the HOA board for 8 a.m. sharp on Monday morning, another for the resident forum. A third went out to the Y Compliance Platform's admin, requesting a full system export of citation activity from the past 12 months, citing bylaw-backed transparency rights. Everything was queued, one quiet wave of action, no threats, no grandstanding, just every system Colleen abused, turning around to face her. I shut off the light, paused in the doorway, and looked at the table one last time. This wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a speech. It was something worse. It was a slow, grinding, unstoppable demand for accountability, with her own bylaws holding the blade. Because people like Colleen never expect to be beaten by the very thing they use to scare others. And that's exactly why it works. The park smelled like barbecue and sunscreen. Saturday was the neighborhood's annual summer social. Burgers on the grill, chalk art on the pavement, kids in bounce houses, HOA-approved music humming from rented speakers. Colleen was there, of course. Center stage as usual, plastic smile, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge. I kept my distance. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to make a network. The petition sheets were folded neatly inside my folder, labeled by address block. I had 22 already signed from the digital version I'd posted the night before. I didn't need everyone, just 10%. But I wasn't stopping at 10. "Hey, Eli," a voice called behind me. I turned to find Jamal, a neighbor I'd only exchanged nods with before, holding a soda and looking tired in a way that felt familiar. "You the one who posted that clause thing on the forum?" "I am." He glanced around, then stepped closer. "I read it twice. Didn't know she wasn't allowed to fine without board approval." "Most people don't." He exhaled sharply. "She fined me for having an extension cord visible from the sidewalk. It was plugged into a battery pack during the blackout, not even running power." "You want that fine reversed?" "I want her gone." I handed him a pen. That was signature 23. I didn't campaign. I didn't plead. I just talked to people who had stories, ones that sounded like ours. Families tired of ducking citations, tired of the thinly veiled discrimination, tired of the fear in their own driveways. By the time I left the park, I had 41. Later that evening, I scanned and filed every name into a growing PDF. I backed it up in 3 places: home server, encrypted cloud, and a hard drive in my desk drawer. I wasn't taking chances, not with this. Then I moved on to the next part of the trap. The HOA portal allowed residents to request meeting topics with 48 hours notice. I submitted 3: enforcement clause suspension, procedural audit vote, and temporary leadership freeze. I attached the full document bundle, timestamps, version logs, meeting minutes, and Raymond scans, all organized into one master evidence folder. Within an hour, the system sent a receipt. Colleen wouldn't be able to ignore it. The board couldn't reject it without violating their own notice rules. And if they didn't address it at the meeting, that would be another violation. The deeper I pushed, the more brittle her empire became. But it wasn't just about the board anymore. The real shift happened after sunset. I logged into the neighborhood forum again and saw that Mrs. Daniels had started a thread. "Has your family been fined without hearing?" It had 26 replies in an hour. Then Graham's next-door neighbor chimed in, "Got one last year, never got a vote notice." Another thread popped up, then another. The silence Colleen had built her power on was breaking, and it wasn't me doing the talking anymore. It was them. Natalie came to stand behind me at the desk, one hand resting gently on my shoulder as she read the screen. "You did that," she whispered. "No," I said. "She did." I closed the laptop and stood up, wrapping an arm around her as we walked toward the nursery. We hadn't quite finished yet. The walls were still half-painted, the crib still boxed, but the space felt safe. Natalie looked up at me. "What if she pushes back harder?" "She will," I said. "But now she'll have to push against her own rules." Outside, the wind rustled the maple tree again. Its branches tapped gently against the porch eaves, a rhythmic sound like quiet applause. Colleen had turned HOA enforcement into a weapon. Now I'd made it a mirror, and soon she'd have to face the reflection she'd spent years avoiding. Ever watched a community finally stand up to the people in charge? Tell me in the comments. Would you sign the petition, or wait to see who else did first? Monday night came fast. The clubhouse lights were too bright, the plastic chairs too close together. It smelled faintly of coffee, old carpet, and whatever air freshener Colleen always overused before meetings. I walked in with my binder under one arm and Natalie's printed support letter in the other. She wasn't coming tonight, not with the baby due in a few weeks, but she'd written a statement. I'd read it if they tried to silence her voice. Colleen stood near the front, arms crossed, lips tight. Her confidence hadn't cracked yet, but her eyes tracked me too often for someone in control. She hadn't expected the forum post to spiral, or the petition signatures, or the procedural request forms submitted by a dozen separate households. But the real blow had been the system logs, the edits, the version control metadata, the proof she had quietly altered board-approved documents. And tonight, we were going to say it, out loud, into the record. Graham was seated already, flipping through the printed agenda with the energy of a man who just wanted it to be over. Raymond sat beside him, eyes steady, posture tight. He nodded to me once. People filled the folding chairs quickly, far more than usual. The room buzzed with an energy that hadn't been here in past meetings. This wasn't passive attendance. This was anticipation. When the meeting was called to order, Colleen cleared her throat and tried to proceed like normal. She read the agenda points with clipped efficiency, tried to breeze past the item I'd submitted. Next on the agenda is Community landscaping budget reallocation. Objection, Raymond said, clear and strong. Colleen froze. Excuse me? Raymond turned his microphone on. You're skipping agenda item 5B. The petitioned request for procedural audit submitted by Mr. Vance and co-signed by 13 homeowners. Murmurs, people shifting forward in their chairs. Colleen's smile was glass. That item was improperly submitted. It met the 48-hour notice requirement and included the required number of signatures, I said, opening my binder. It's valid under Section 4.8. Graham cleared his throat. He's right. The room went still. I stood and walked to the podium. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. For the record, I began, this petition requests 3 actions: an immediate audit of enforcement procedures, a freeze on Section 7.2, pending document verification, and a temporary suspension of discretionary powers held by the HOA president during the review. I placed a stack of documents on the table. These include 12 recorded violations of bylaw procedure, including unauthorized citations, misuse of retired clauses, and alteration of governing documents without board vote. Colleen's fingers dug into her armrest, knuckles white. I didn't look at her. I looked at the room. These aren't accusations, I said. They're patterns, and they're backed by timestamps, system logs, and original meeting minutes provided by Treasurer Delaney. Raymond shifted, but he didn't look away. His silence was over. He'd chosen his side. I held up Natalie's letter. My wife couldn't be here tonight. She's on bed rest, but she wanted me to say this. No one should fear their mailbox. No one should be penalized for existing quietly inside their own home. And no president, elected or self-appointed, should rewrite the rules to punish people they don't like. I placed the letter down, folded my hands, waited. For a moment, no one moved. Then Graham leaned forward, brow furrowed. I motioned that we accept the petition and schedule a formal vote on all 3 actions. Raymond seconded it. Colleen started to object, something about form, about tone, but it didn't land, because the room had already shifted. They saw the binder. They saw the unity. They saw that the man they had dismissed as quiet had studied every inch of the system before exposing it. The vote was scheduled. 10 days from tonight. Formal, binding, logged in the meeting record. I packed up my things slowly. No rush. I didn't need to slam the door, because now the structure was moving. And no matter what Colleen tried, it was too late to stop it. The night of the vote, they had to bring in extra chairs. The room was packed. Folding seats stretched into the hallway, neighbors shoulder to shoulder. Couples stood near the back, arms crossed, whispering. Even the Thompsons showed up. The for sale sign still staked in their front lawn, but hope flickering just enough behind their eyes. Colleen walked in 10 minutes late. She didn't apologize. She wore a navy pantsuit and a forced smile, like this was still her court. But the way she clutched the clipboard told a different story. Her eyes didn't scan the room with command anymore. They searched, measured. She could feel it, the tide that had turned. I sat in the second row with my binder closed, no need to flash it now. Raymond sat 2 seats over, tie slightly crooked, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. But he was here, and beside him, Graham looked like he hadn't slept. The meeting was called to order. Raymond took the lead this time, his voice steady. Tonight's agenda includes a community vote on 3 matters proposed and seconded in our previous session. These motions are binding under Section 5.3 of the bylaws and will be resolved by simple majority. Colleen leaned toward her mic. Before we proceed, I'd like to make a personal statement. Point of order, I said, rising. The bylaws don't permit opening statements ahead of a member vote unless previously scheduled. That's Section 4.9. A ripple of murmurs followed. Someone near the back even clapped once before stopping themselves. Raymond nodded. That's correct. We'll proceed directly to the motions. He read each aloud. The first, suspension of Section 7.2, pending review of document authenticity. The second, procedural audit of all citations and enforcement actions over the past 12 months. The third, temporary suspension of Colleen Ashbury's discretionary enforcement powers until completion of the audit. Each one echoed through the room like a dropped stone in still water. Colleen didn't flinch. but her fingers curled tighter around her clipboard, knuckles pale. The floor opened to comments. Mrs. Daniels stood first. "I've lived here for 21 years, she said. "I never once had a problem until last year. Then suddenly I was being cited for letting my son park in the driveway on weekends." A man beside her added, "My wife was warned for hanging a wind chime. A wind chime. It's not about rules, it's about control." One by one they stood, residents who had never spoken at a meeting, parents, veterans, retirees, people who'd bitten their tongues for months, even years, until they saw someone else speak up first. That's all it took. By the time the floor closed, no one had defended Colleen, not one. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just sat there, still. Maybe she realized anything she said now would only prove the point. Raymond called the vote. Each hand raised, felt, like a crack in the ceiling. Motion 1, passed. Motion 2, passed. Motion 3, passed by a wider margin than the others. It was done. Colleen sat frozen for a beat. Then, without a word, she stood and walked briskly out of the room. No ceremony, no retaliation, just quiet retreat. I remained seated. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about fixing what had been broken so long, people had stopped believing it could be repaired. Raymond turned off his mic and walked over. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "We did. You stood up." He hesitated. "Too late." "No," I said. "Exactly on time." As people filed out, I saw neighbors shaking hands for the first time. Others hugged. One woman offered to start a committee for rewriting the bylaws more transparently. The silence had fractured, and something better was rushing in to replace it. When I stepped outside, Natalie was waiting in the car. She waved through the window, her smile soft and proud. I opened the door and got in. "Well," she asked, "it's done." She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Then, let's go home." We pulled out slowly, passing the clubhouse and the maple tree beyond it, lit gold under the street lamp. The house we fought for still stood. And now, so did the community Natalie slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I lay beside her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breath, the silence inside our house finally real, no lingering dread, no letters slid under the door, no phantom footsteps near the porch. Just quiet, not the kind Colleen used to control us. This was earned quiet, ours. In the morning, I stood under the maple tree with a rake in hand. The leaves had started to fall early that year, rust-colored, brittle at the edges. I remembered planting it with my father. He'd said something I hadn't understood back then. Plant what you want your children to see out their window when the world tries to block the light. He hadn't been talking about trees. Natalie stepped out onto the porch in her robe, one hand resting on her stomach. "It looks stronger this year," she said. "Because it is," I replied. "No one's cutting it down now." A week had passed since the vote. Colleen hadn't shown her face. No official resignation, but word spread fast. She'd cleaned out her home office, closed her board email, even canceled the September meeting without explanation. Graham resigned 2 days later. No drama, just a single sentence posted in the forum. I lost sight of what I was supposed to protect. Raymond stayed, and for the first time, he sounded like a leader. We weren't naive. Power doesn't just vanish when someone steps down. It waits, shifts, looks for cracks to crawl back in. But cracks can be sealed, especially when a community learns to speak again. At the next gathering, the clubhouse felt different. The lights weren't so harsh. People brought food without being told what size the containers had to be. Kids ran through the aisles. Parents didn't hush them. No one got fined for playing music 10 minutes past the posted hours. Raymond opened with a proposal, drafting a new transparency amendment. This time, it would be community written. And they asked me to help lead it. I didn't want the title. I still don't. But I agreed, because you don't rebuild a home by walking away from its broken beams. You fix it, carefully, together. Natalie and I finished painting the nursery that weekend. She laughed when I almost spilled primer on the rug. Said the baby would grow up surrounded by stories about trees and neighbors and what it meant to fight quietly, without anger, but with absolute resolve. When we hung the final picture frame, I noticed she'd placed a photo inside I hadn't seen before. It was my dad, kneeling in the dirt next to the sapling, smiling like he knew how far it would grow. I swallowed hard. "Where'd you find this?" "Back of your old toolbox," she said. "He would have been proud of you." I couldn't speak right away, because she was right, and because the fight hadn't changed me. It had reminded me who I already was, someone who builds, who protects, who refuses to let paper pushers rewrite the meaning of home. The fines were dropped, every one of them. The families who'd stayed felt it, relief without fanfare, justice without applause. The Thompsons took down their for sale sign. Jamal helped repaint the community center mural with his daughter. Mrs. Daniels planted a rose bush where her old violation notice used to hang. As for us, we stayed quiet about the win. Because it wasn't about headlines, it was about peace. About sitting on our porch swing as the sun fell behind the rooftops and knowing our daughter would never have to ask why a stranger once tried to evict her mother before she was even born. I watched Natalie rock gently in the swing, her hand tracing circles over her belly, humming something low and soft and safe. And I thought, this is what legacy feels like. The kind you plant, the kind you defend. Not with volume, not with vengeance, with truth, with roots. I didn't just fight for our house, I whispered mostly to myself. I fought for the right to belong in it. The final paragraph must include a closing quote or reflection from the protagonist that echoes the theme of justice, dignity, or legacy. Follow this with a CTA inviting viewers to share their own HOA struggles or comment where they're watching from. Make the audience feel seen. Justice isn't loud. It's the sound of no one knocking on your door to take back what you've earned. Tell me, have you ever stood up to your HOA or watched someone cross a line? Share your story in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. You're not alone.